Hello and welcome back to the Lydia McGrew channel. I'm doing something different today. We finished our series on alleged themes in the Gospel of John. And today I'm going to talk about what I've called three meanings of meaning. And I'm going to be stating similar content in a couple different ways in this video. So if you watch the whole thing, I'm going to ask for your forgiveness in advance if it is somewhat repetitive. But by the same token, if you don't want to watch the whole thing, you'll get some of the most important content near the beginning. I'm responding here to something that Dr. Michael Licona has begun doing repeatedly lately. I've seen twice now with different interlocutors, interviewers, that he's done this, maybe even a third time. He's been making an analogy between what he calls compositional devices, what I've called fact-changing literary devices that he thinks the gospel authors engaged in, and a simple hyperbole or somewhat exaggerated statement in Mark 1:5. Now, in Mark 1:5, it says, all the country of Judea and all Jerusalem were going out to him and being baptized by him. And the him there is John the Baptist. And what Dr. Licona has really doubled down on, and I've seen one of his followers doing this as well, is that the view of his critics, namely me, being one of the most, prolific critics of his views, if it were consistently applied, would mean that Mark must be changing the facts because it wasn't literally true that every single person in Jerusalem was baptized by John the Baptist, that every single person in the country of Judea was going out to see John the Baptist and so forth. And he actually said in the most recent version of this that Mark is changing the facts by using this hyperbole, but obviously that's okay. So it's interesting because he was asked in that most recent one if he could steel man the position of his critics. And then he proceeded to use this. And this is far from being a steel man. In fact, to say that my view, if it were consistently applied, would mean that Mark has to be saying, that every single person in Jerusalem was baptized by John the Baptist, or else Mark is changing the facts. That's actually a straw man of my position. My position doesn't imply that at all. So it's the opposite of a steel man. And I find it a concerning and even a disturbing analogy because the things that Dr. Licona and I disagree with are so obviously and so completely different in kind and in type from that slight hyperbole that Mark is making there, or any hyperbole or an anthropomorphism in the Psalms. Bow down your ear to me, O God, is not changing the facts because God doesn't literally have an ear as the psalmist is conceiving it. It's a personification. So those are not at all what we're talking about. And I really want to challenge you, if you've been confronted by this comparison, or if you've even been inclined to just go along with it, to please rethink. I really want to I want to request that in a heartfelt way, that you would stop for a moment, pause for a moment, and think about whether those are really the same kinds of things. I want to say something surprising perhaps here. It would be entirely possible for someone to disagree with me about the genre of the Gospels, for someone to think that the Gospel authors were in a genre such that they considered themselves allowed to alter the times when things happened and the places when things happened and so forth. As Dr. Licona does think, disagree with me there, but agree that the phrase fact-changing is a completely legitimate phrase to describe what that person thinks the gospel authors were doing. In fact, that would be much more profitable. It's a neutral descriptor. And we can agree, okay, yeah, you think they changed the facts, and I think they didn't, and now let's discuss the arguments pro and con. And to see that it would be possible to disagree with me about the genre of the Gospels, disagree with me about what the authors are doing, and yet agree with me about the concept of fact changing and that they are fact changing, just consider the analogy of a movie based on true events. This is an analogy that Dr. Licona has made. In movies based on true events, and I'll be giving more examples here, they often do change the facts. I was just reminded lately that in Chariots of Fire, they make it more dramatic by making Eric Liddell find out that he's scheduled to run on the Sunday when he's actually on the boat on the way to France. In reality, it occurred at an earlier time. So they changed that fact. Now, I like the movie. It's one of my very favorite movies. But it is fact-changing. Moreover, you could even agree with me that that has a negative effect on reliability. But you might say to me, oh, well, that's just the way it is. We have to bite the bullet. The Gospels aren't as historically reliable as we might have wanted them to be. But admit that, yeah, that's less reliable. Think about this for a moment. If you were writing a paper on the life of Eric Liddell, or on the life of Harold Abrams, another character in that story, would you cite the movie Chariots of Fire as a historical source in like a dissertation or something about the facts of the life, the historical facts of the life of these people, and just cite the movie? Well, that's how it happened in Chariots of Fire. That's how I know that this is how it really happened. No. I mean, you certainly shouldn't, and I'm sure your dissertation committee would not be thrilled that you're doing that unless they're postmodernists or something. But if you just cited that, naively, like, there's my historical source, Chariots of Fire. No, they'd say, well, but that movie changed some things. So if you want to find out if this is what really happened, you need to delve into it more. The character of Lord Lindsay in that movie was actually a composite character. He didn't really exist. So, what if you put that in your dissertation? And it was so great when Lord Lindsay offered to give up his spot so that Eric Liddell could run instead of him and didn't have to run on Sunday. Didn't happen. Okay, so you could even agree, yeah, that does make them somewhat unreliable, but, that's just the way it is. And then we could argue about whether that's just the way it is. Okay, so there are levels here. And when I first got into this, was hoping that that's what I would encounter, where we could say, okay, this is a neutral description. This is what we disagree on. Now let's get on and let this conversation move on to where it needs to go, which is the arguments about whether they were doing this or not. And instead, we're getting all this confusion here right at the outset, like, no, you can't use fact changing, no, you can't use fictionalizing, etc., and you'd have to be saying that Mark is fact changing when he says all of Jerusalem went out to be baptized by John, and that's just causing confusion to the discussion, not allowing the discussion to take place at the level where it really should take place. All right, so that's my short version. All right, to move on to my 3 meanings of meaning. I'm going to use a phrase. I'm not going to say that this is some technical phrase that other people have used. I'm using it for the purpose of this video, and it's actually somewhat redundant. Semantic meaning. Semantic means meaning. Okay, so it's a somewhat redundant phrase. Semantic meaning. What's the semantic meaning of all the country of Judea and all Jerusalem were going out to him and being baptized by him? The semantic meaning is there are a whole bunch of people. He was very popular in that area, and a lot of people from that area were being baptized by him. Just like if I use the phrase, I have a frog in my throat. It's obviously an idiom. Even if you don't know English very well and you hear it, you ought to be able to recognize immediately that's some kind of idiom. Maybe you don't know what kind of an idiom it is. Maybe you just have to guess. at what its literal semantic meaning is. But nobody's changing the facts to say Lydia's voice is hoarse, okay, when I expressed it as Lydia has a frog in her throat, okay? Those really do have the same semantic meaning of that phrase right there. It's immediately recognizable to someone who is a competent speaker of the language and is knowledgeable. Now, don't, because I mentioned something known in the culture or the audience or the language, just pause for a minute, hold your horses, if I may use an idiom, and don't say, see, you're really saying the same thing. It's the compositional devices, but you say you disagree with Dr. Licona, but you just said, I have a frog in my throat, and to call that my voice is hoarse has the same meaning that's known to somebody in the culture. So he says it's known to somebody in the culture. No. We got to think more precisely. Okay? If I'm watching the movie Chariots of Fire and I am culturally knowledgeable and I am linguistically knowledgeable, I know English, the language in which the movie was filmed, there's going to be nothing about that scene where Eric Liddell, I think he finds it on a schedule. But anyway, he's on the boat and he finds out he's scheduled to run on Sunday. There's going to be nothing in that scene that means he actually found it out earlier. On the contrary, the semantic meaning in the movie, I'm correctly understanding the movie if I understand him finding out while he's on the boat on the way to France. Okay? So it's completely different from all the country of Judea went out. At the most, if I am culturally knowledgeable, I will know that some things may be changed. I will know that this is a fact-changing genre. Okay? But it's still fact-changing. It's not a figure of speech being used because it doesn't have the same meaning as Eric Liddell's, the same semantic meaning as Eric Liddell's finding out earlier. It has a different semantic meaning. And it's seamless within the movie. My cultural knowledge that this is in that genre doesn't tell me when he actually found out. It doesn't flag that scene as a place where the facts were changed. Okay? So this is still completely different. And as mentioned before, does affect the reliability of the movie. That doesn't make it morally some kind of problem. That we're not even getting into that. Okay, I like movies based on true events. I'm not out there saying, oh, they're a bunch of lying liars, but they're not reliable historical sources. So if the Gospels were in that, and even if their audiences were like okay with it, that doesn't make it reliable. In fact, it makes it unreliable as an actual historical source. So I just really want to challenge you. Keep thinking about this, okay? Semantic meaning, the semantic meaning of all the country of Judea and all Jerusalem were going out to him to be baptized by him is that a lot of people were going out. That is the semantic meaning. But when Dr. Licona has a compositional device, so let me give you an example of one of the compositional devices he alleges in the Gospels, which is that John changed the day of the crucifixion, and that John was attempting to portray Jesus as being crucified on the same day when the Passover lambs were killed, which is then contradictory to what the synoptic authors are portraying. Now, I don't think John is trying to say that. I don't think that the semantic meaning about the day of the month when Jesus was killed is actually different. I think they actually agree on that. But in John's story, according to his view, the semantic meaning is a different day. It's a different semantic meaning. Okay? Or that one of the examples he gives in this recent video is that Matthew says that Jesus went up on a mountain to give what's known as the Sermon on the Mount, but that didn't really happen. And this is contradictory to the Sermon on a Level Place that Luke says, because Dr. Licona thinks those are definitely the same occurrence. He rejects harmonizations. He says, no, you can't harmonize these. but Matthew is changing the location of that sermon to make Jesus appear more as the new Moses. Well, there's nothing in there in Matthew to indicate that this is different from where it actually happened. In fact, the nature of the theory is that Matthew is communicating in his document that this happened on a type of place, namely a mountain, different from, which in fact is different from where it actually happened. So that the semantic meaning is Jesus went up on a mountain, and then Jesus came down from the mountain afterwards, and that semantic meaning, the theory goes, is not in fact corresponding to what really happened. You see? So this is not the same as everybody knows who Elon Musk is. So let me give that as a contemporary example. If I, exaggerating using an obvious, recognizable hyperbole, like what Mark is doing in Mark 1, I might say, everybody knows who Elon Musk is. Do I mean every single person alive right now in the world, or even every single person who is capable of speaking or something? Right now, everybody alive knows who Elon Musk is. No, it's an obvious exaggeration. The semantic meaning is that a whole lot of people know who Elon Musk is, okay? So these are not the same. All right, semantic meaning. All right, second type of meaning I'm going to talk about is what I'm going to call broad summary meaning. You can always find a level of description that you can make vague enough that two things that are really quite different in their content, like two narratives that are really quite different in their semantic content, can be described so that they have the same. You can often do this. So then it's still confusing to say they have the same meaning. So I'm going to give an example here. Suppose someone made a movie based on true events concerning my and my husband Tim's life. Obviously, nobody's really going to do this. I'm just imagining it because it gives me a way to come up with examples. And suppose that in that movie, we meet on the campus of Baptist Bible College, which is where I went as an undergraduate and Tim did for a couple of years. And suppose that in the movie, the way we meet there is that we're both coming around a corner and we bump into each other. And I drop my books and we're angry at each other and we're arguing. And at first we don't like each other because I think he's rude for bumping into me and not apologizing enough or whatever, okay? And then as the movie goes on, of course, we fall in love and we get married. All right. It is true that we met on the campus of Baptist Bible College. That's true. But that story I just told is made up. We didn't bump into, we have never bumped into one another coming around a corner and my dropping books. That's not how we met. That didn't happen. In fact, I borrowed that from a novel I read where two of the characters meet that way. She's an artist and she drops her paintings in a puddle, and then they are mad at each other and eventually get married. That's where I got that idea from, okay? But you could so we actually met on the campus, but we met in a completely different way. I was practicing the piano and he came in. That's how we actually met. That's the true story. But you could describe them at this broad narrative summary level. Tim and Lydia met on the campus of Baptist Bible College when Lydia was a student. So that story about them bumping into each other around the corner and the true story about them meeting while she was practicing the piano, they have the same meaning. So no facts have been changed. Now, I just want to ask you to please stop and think, use your common sense. Of course, facts have been changed. If you tell this story about us bumping into each other and you put that into the movie, hey, it's a movie based on true events. As long as people know it's a movie based on true events, maybe they're not upset about that. But in fact, it's changing the facts. It's making up an incident that didn't occur. So similarly, consider the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus. It's Dr. Lacona's view that when Matthew describes they're meeting Jesus in Galilee. And when Luke and John describe their meeting Jesus in Jerusalem, those are actually the same occurrence. And that one side or the other changed the location. And, Galilee is not just a stone's throw. It's not like the greater Jerusalem area or something. No one would refer to Galilee as Jerusalem. So again, this isn't a figure of speech. The idea is that one of them literally moved the occurrence by a good 70 miles, several days walk. That also changes the circumstances, because Matthew said they went to the mountain that Jesus had told them of. So there's some degree of expectation that they're going to see him. Whereas in the story that John and Luke tell, they're very surprised. Okay, they've heard from the women about, the empty tomb, and they probably had heard from the women that they'd actually seen Jesus. They've just heard in Luke from Clopas and his companion that they've seen Jesus. Okay, but they're still not expecting him to just show up there. Okay, so it's not a scheduled meeting. Different circumstances. One is clearly indoors, because in John and Luke it says they're inside. Okay, the door is shut. Probably Matthew is indicating that it was outside, because he said Jesus came to them, and they went to a mountain, he says. So they're outside. My guess is that's to accommodate a larger number of people. So just like telling about Tim and me meeting by bumping into one another, as opposed to him coming in while I'm practicing the piano, even though those are both stories of our meeting, they're not the same story. The circumstances are different. So here, the circumstances are different. And the facts have definitely, if Dr. Licona were correct, have definitely been changed. Now, I myself think those are different meetings. In fact, I think the very differences are evidence that they're different meetings, and that nobody's moving something. Nobody's changing the circumstances. They're just telling about two completely different meetings that took place. And that's clear because they're so different. The stories are so different. So the semantic meaning has been changed on his view. Okay, and describing it at this high level, well, they both mean that Jesus met his disciples after he was crucified and resurrected. So we're just going to describe it that vaguely. See, they have the same meaning. That leads to confusion. All right, third meaning of meaning is the theological or ideological meaning, or the point of something, why it's important, something like that. And here it should be really clear that things can have the facts change, even though somebody is going to say, but they have the same meaning. And now it's this not just high level narrative summary, but it's also some sort of significance. Well, they both have the same significance. So consider, for example, the theory that John changed the day of the crucifixion, which Dr. Licona endorses. This is supposedly to emphasize that Jesus is the Lamb of God. Well, someone could say Jesus really was the Lamb of God. Jesus' crucifixion really did represent taking our sins upon him and being sacrificed for us. So, even though John changes the day on this theory, it has the same meaning as the crucifixion and the synoptics, because Jesus is really a sacrifice for our sins in both of them. So see, it has the same meaning. Well, at this point, we've gone to just this theological significance. Obviously not the same as all Judea and Jerusalem went to be baptized by John the Baptist has the same meaning as a lot of people went to be baptized by John. They're just completely different in kind. All right? The attempting to convey a true theological meaning by altering the historical facts and narrating seamlessly as though that's the way it happened historically does not have the same meaning in anything like the same sense. And by the way, I don't think that John did change it. I don't think John does disagree. Dr. Craig Blomberg's done a lot of good work on that, and I adopt his view. I actually think John and the Synoptics are in agreement about the day of Jesus' crucifixion. To return to the movie analogy, suppose that in this movie based on true events, it portrays Tim and me doing something for one of our daughter's birthday by taking her on a horseback riding excursion. Because she likes horses, I like horses, etc. Now that never happened, okay? We never took any of our daughters on a horseback ride for her birthday. We never even got in one of those ponies that, they walk around, but we just never did that. But I did take one of our daughters on a day trip to Chicago for her birthday, or in honor of her birthday. And we had a lot of fun there and went to the top of the Sears Tower and so forth. All right. But you could say, oh, first of all, you do that second high level thing. It's the same meaning because it's they arranged a special outing for their daughter's birthday. So we're describing it at this generalization level, and then also claim that it has the same meaning because of the ideological significance. They love their daughter. They were willing to put in effort to give her a happy memory. But obviously, the horseback riding scene in the movie, in that case, would be fact-changing. So I hope that this is helpful. I really want to appeal to you. If you've heard this, even if you've been inclined to accept it, oh man, Lydia would have to think that Mark 1:5 is fact-changing. Think again. My view is not stupid. It's not silly. It's not unnuanced in such a sense that would follow from it. And I hope this has made that clear. And then secondly, there are more important stakes here, because this does affect the reliability of the Gospels if they're like movies based on true events. That in and of itself doesn't say that it's false, but it does say that you shouldn't just, sit down and watch a 15-minute, video where Dr. Licona makes this comparison to Mark 1:5 and then say, now I know what their beef is, they being, me and others who disagree with them, and they're just really weird. So again, the opposite of steel manning. So this is all fine, and then you never go and look into it. Please look into it more. Do we really have evidence that the gospel authors thought they were licensed to do this? That they were writing in a genre where they believed they were licensed to do this? Because that would make them unreliable, even if it didn't upset anybody. Okay? Even if it were in that genre, by that very token, they would be unreliable. So then that brings us, in a sense, to the first step. And going on from here, that's where you should be looking into the evidence on both sides. The Mirror of the Mask is a book in which I've done that in great detail. And I would also point out that all the evidence for literal factual gospel reliability is in fact evidence against that genre model. That it even seems to show that even on matters of detail, they're not changing the facts. So I hope you'll look into this more, and I hope this is helpful. Please click like, subscribe to this channel for more great content, and come back next time to the Lydia McGrew channel, where we're making common sense rigorous.